Fellow Psychonauts, it's me, Dolo. I've been putting off my thoughts on Jordan Peterson for a while now because, well, I'm not a fan of his work. Like, at all. However, unfortunately, he is the most prominent figure discussing archetypes right now. So as a channel that also likes to discuss archetypes a lot, I feel it's important to differentiate between Dolo Archetypes and Jordo Archetypes. When I discuss archetypes on this channel, I am specifically referring to hallucinatory archetypes, as in specific visions and phenomena commonly experienced under the influence of certain psychedelic drugs. I like to analyze the symbols, their meanings, and the potential psychoneuropharmacological causes of these visionary patterns. Like, why are circus vibes so often experienced in hallucinations? Subscribe and find out soon. Jordo's approach on archetypes, on the other hand, is to point out patterns in human behavior and defend his interpretations of those patterns as unchangeable facts about the human condition.
Talking more about permanent patterns of behavior, because what our culture is essentially is a dance of permanent patterns of behavior.
While there are some aspects of his archetype philosophy that I do agree with, namely the fact that archetypes are rooted in psychology rather than being the manifestation of a metaphysical superspace, although I disagree with nearly all of his interpretations. My biggest grievance with his conception of archetypes is that he views them through a dualistic cosmology that ultimately leads to sexism and many other naiveties. Dualism, put simply, is the view that the universe is fundamentally binary, as in composed of two separate opposing elements, dark and light, up and down, man and woman, etc. The cosmological part is that these two elements morally rival each other, diametrically opposed in an eternal state of conflict. In the pursuit of meaning, Jordo poses life as a struggle between order and chaos, which he correlates with good versus evil, respectively.
The fundamental narrative landscape in some sense is good versus evil in the world of chaos versus order.
As his whole bag is advocating for more order in our lives to combat the chaotic unknown. He explicitly states that order is represented as masculine. He also characterizes the archetypal hero's journey as masculine.
The hero in the archetypal story essentially goes out and confronts chaos, and that's the indeterminate world. That's the world, the confusing, uncertain world, full of unexpected occurrences, dangerous, threatening, and also promising.
Because to his mind, the hero's journey is to triumph over chaos to return order.
In that pursuit, especially if it's done voluntarily, it's possible to find deep meaning. And that meaning is an expression of the instinct that guides us out into the unknown so that we can conquer it, let's say, and prevail.
But if chaos is represented by the feminine, the only logical conclusion to this line of thinking is that femininity is evil. His best-selling book, Antidote to Chaos, directly implies that femininity is a sickness that his genius 12 rules can cure. He dodges all of these accusations of sexism through appeals to tradition, stating that he didn't create this association between chaotic and the feminine. It's simply a fact of biology and history.
It isn't me doing this symbolic labeling, which is another thing that my critics don't seem to understand. I didn't invent these symbolic domains, far from it. I'm merely drawing people's attention to them.
His favorite go-to sources for this bold claim are Disney cartoons and the Bible. He claims that the message of fiction is actually more real than reality itself, somehow.
That seems to be something that's realer than real, because everyone experiences that to some degree, or everyone can relate to it. It's a deep, deep theme. And what I'm looking for in the biblical stories and in other mythological representations is these deep universal themes.
What the Jeepster fails to consider is that these archetypes are not always based in universal biological psychology, but are often based on the author's particular view of the world. This is how propaganda works, my guy. You can't just cherry pick your favorite works of fiction and then claim its philosophy is realer than real. It's very evident this is what he is doing too, as he despises the movie Frozen for what he perceives as feminist ideology.
Well, she wants to be unconscious, and no bloody wonder. She was protected her whole life. She's so damn naive that her first love affair just about kills her. She wants to go to sleep and never wake up. And so that's exactly what happens. And then she has to wait for the prince to come and rescue her. Well, you think, how sexist can you get, that story? Well, seriously, because that's the way that would be read in the modern world. It's like she doesn't need a prince to rescue her. That's why Disney made Frozen that absolutely appalling piece of rubbish.
Jorpdorp isn't wrong that there have been plenty of examples in literature that explicitly or implicitly correlates femininity with chaos or whatever. But the opposite is true too. That is because, in reality, chaos and order are subjective characteristics that we project onto reality. We can see chaos and order in everything if we look for it. To say any one thing is purely chaotic or orderly is nonsensical, and neither of these two characteristics are inherently good or bad. In other words, these are false correlations that are not concrete or unchangeable. Like, yeah, it's good to have a routine and have order in one's daily life, but also a little bit of chaos can help break up the monotony to keep life from becoming boring, for example. But the Jordanator prefers his interpretation because he is afraid of femininity. This is why he spends so much time denouncing feminism and projects a lot of his anger onto his strawman arguments.
Why is the feminine represented as chaos? Well, let's throw something back at your feminist friends. Why is the masculine represented as order by feminists? I mean, let's address that question initially.
I would really like to know Jordan's source here. Every feminist that I've spoken to and any feminist literature that I've read don't tend to use symbolic language and claim objective archetypal correlations. Instead, focus on real-world material oppression for which there is plenty of evidence for. So what the fuck is he talking about? Honestly, as often as he claims to read a lot, he frequently shows his hand that he doesn't read nearly as much as he says he does. And he really says some mask-off incel shit in this segment too.
The feminine challenges the masculine. And it challenges the masculine by throwing the masculine into disorder. And it does that primarily through rejection. And so if you're a man and you're trying to embody productive order, let's say, and you make an advance on a woman, the feminine, you make an advance on the feminine, then we'll say archetypally, and you're rejected, then that interjects a tremendous amount of chaos into your existence, the chaos that's attendant on such a fundamental rejection.
So being rejected by a woman is chaos now? Would it be more orderly for a woman to just submit to any man who demands it? Dude, she's just not... Move on. I mean, it's by no means news that Jordan uses many incel talking points. There is a lengthy page on Incel Wiki dedicated to him. I wrote most of the script before I found this, and all of my points were already there, except for the whole bit about cosmological dualism. Some people claim he beat the incel accusations because he's not celibate. A non-cel, if you will. But it's not about whether or not he has an adequate sex life, like we want to know that anyways. It's that many aspects of his ideology aligns with the incel red pill. Hence why so many incels are big fans. Some identifying as incels, particularly the black-pilled and the men who go their own way groups, disagree with JP over various things like his advocacy for monogamy. The world is non-dualistic, and humans have a tendency to oversimplify complexities to make sense of the world and our roles within it. Hence why I think appeals to tradition are weak arguments. So here's an analogy. The value spectrum is often described as a scale between black and white, polar opposites. In contrast, the color spectrum is rarely if ever described as a scale between red and purple, because the stages in between differ greater than the polar ends. That being said, there are some languages, such as the Dani spoken in Papua New Guinea, who only use two terms to describe color, warm and cool. The same human perception, but very different models of thinking about the phenomenon. Gender is similar because it is commonly referred to as a binary in the so-called West, despite the reality of it being made up of innumerable complex elements. Though I could say a lot more, I want to conclude by saying this. Jordan P. Peterson contributes to misogynistic anger toward women, male dominance, and unjust competitive hierarchies, all of which endangers women, trans, and marginalized peoples. It is very unhealthy for us all, and tradition does not justify these types of predatory behaviors. Things ought to change for the better. This video was made thanks to the interbeings of Patreon. Become an interbeing yourself by signing up at any tier. Liking this video is order, so beware of the dislike button. Comment beep the Jeep down below so I know you're a real one. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell if you haven't already for that good weekly content. I've started streaming on Wednesday nights too, so join me for that. Anyways, I've got to go clean my room, so shoulders back and trip safe, everyone.
I've watched women go through their professional careers, many of them. It's a very rare woman who at the age of 30 doesn't consider having a child her primary desire. And the ones that don't consider that, generally, in my observation, there's something that isn't quite right in the way that they're constituted or looking at the world.